Hi, welcome back to the Arcade Repair Tips video series. Today we're going to call this Board Troubleshooting 101. In other words, basic board troubleshooting. We're not going to go into a lot of details, but there are a few things that you guys should check. Of course, if your board is in serious need of repair, you need to send it off to somebody who's very qualified and can do those intricate repairs. But these are a few things that you should check first so that you can fix it before you have to send it off for repair. Now, we have just a few tools here that you're going to see today. Probably the most important one would be some type of magnification, like a magnifying glass or one of those lights with a magnifier work really good. But a good magnifying glass will help. Also, we're going to need a screwdriver, a small one. You guys know I've recommended these before from Hap Controls, where you can flip them over and it has a Phillips on one side, flathead on the other side. Perhaps a pencil with an eraser, and this would be a scribe or something to do a little etching with if we need it. And then lastly, it would be a razor blade or like an etching tool like this. This is a good hobby set you can get at Harbor Freight for about $5, but this will work good for what we need. And probably, a small pair of needle nose, maybe some nippy cutters. Just a few tools that we're going to need. The main thing that we're going to use, though, is our eyes. Okay, so here we have just a generic JAMMA game. And the first thing that I noticed when I got this off the shelf was it's quite dusty. So, you might take a light brush, kind of clean up some of these areas, especially around the chips, or some canned air, to get up in there. I want to make sure that we clean up this board really good. Areas that we're going to work on, just a little bit of cleaning will make it a lot easier when we go to look at it. Probably the most problems with boards are around this edge connectors or where the socketed chips meet. It's a good thing to do a visual inspection of both sides of the board. And you can look for burn traces. This one actually looks really good. There's a little bit of dirt and stuff on there. We'll get that cleaned off. Also, you got to watch if a thing of solder was to drop down on here or set on here. That could go across and cause problems. We want to make sure and get both sides of the board cleaned up. Now, we talked about this before in our videos about cleaning an edge connector. Well, one of the best cleaning tools is a pencil with a nice eraser on it. You can kind of take and clean. These get oxidized stuff over time. Cleaning this up. This connector really looks good. If you compare that, say, with this Pac-Man here that we've been working on. Of course, this board is way dirtier and stuff, but look here, there's even part of the edge connector just by touching it has fallen off, so that cannot make a connection right there. We'll, want to clean those edges really good. Like that. And so we know that that piece that fell off, we could super glue this back on. We're not going to go into a lot of details, but there would be a problem right here because you can see that that's not going to make a connection. When the edge connector is pushed down on there, any part that doesn't make a good connection won't allow flow of electricity to the other parts that we need in order for this game to operate. Also, we want to watch for socketed areas. Make sure that they're clean where we pulled off the chips here. You guys hear us all the time. As you can see where I pulled these chips up, there's a lot of dirt and stuff up under there. We want to make sure that those are good. Also, the legs of the chips. Here would be one of the socketed chips on the board. And what do we mean by socketed? Well, as you can see, this one right here is socketed and can be removed without soldering. These guys right here are not socketed. They're soldered straight onto the board. In order to remove them, I got to go and desolder the other side. A great thing about socketed chips is that you can remove them and replace them pretty easily without having to do any soldering. Here's one tip that I will tell you. If you notice on a board that chips are socketed, that'll give you a good indication that they either commonly fail or they may need to be replaced. So when they made this board, they made these socketed for a reason. So if they're socketed, a socketed chip is a good place to start if you're troubleshooting a board. Anyway, we took this chip off of here, and as you can see, some of the legs are real oxidized and corroded. A good thing to do is an old toothbrush. Makes for a good cleaning tool to get down in here. Also, to clean off some of those legs, you might want to use like a wire brush or something a little tougher, but these are old pins. Sometimes it's better off to go ahead and replace, like on this Pac-Man board, if you're having trouble with your ROM chips, sometimes it's better just to go ahead and put a brand new set on there while you got it down this far. But before you put them in, make sure and clean those areas real good. One thing we talked about is to visually inspect, and having it under a magnification, you can kind of look for bad areas like this. Or right here, hope you guys can see this. This capacitor is really swollen compared to that flat one. You guys, I hope, can see that. This one is really flat on the top. This one's starting to jiffy pop or starting to bubble up. So that capacitor, without reading it with a meter or anything else, we probably know is bad. So again, we're just physically looking for any broken legs on both sides. Again, this board looks pretty good. Whereas if we come back, this Miss Pac-Man board, as you can see, look at the discoloration here. This areas that have gotten really hot. There's some places right there that aren't, the solder has come loose over the years, or is cracked, and we need to touch up those solders. You can tell that these chips got really hot. They're brown compared to the silver solder. Those would be some suspect chips right there. Also, you might notice that there is a foil, green foil, that's all over the board right here. What we're going to look for now is broken traces. We'll pull another board out to show you. You can see there's a scratch right here on this board. See that scratch? How clean that is. There's a scratch right here. Well, if that scratch is completely through that trace, we need to know if the flow is going all the way through from here to here. And where we're going to check that is with the continuity on our meter. Okay, so this would be our point A, we'll say, and to point B. We don't have continuity right here, so there cannot be a flow. And it doesn't have to, this was a pretty visible scratch. It could be a tiny hairline, so don't trust your eyes, trust your meter. But we saw that, we noticed it when we're looking through a magnifying glass. So what we want to do is we want to use something like a 30 gauge insulated wrapping wire. I don't recommend the tiniest jumping wire that you see in a lot of kits. It's just a personal preference. I like a little bit thicker wire. Some people prefer really thin wire. But anyway, you can get a piece of wire and run it from here to here. So all we're going to do is put the wire on this point. This is called a via. In other words, it's a point from one point on your board to another. You'll see those points all over your board where there's a hole that solder is actually filling. So we're just going to take our solder, put a little bit right there on that point, and add a piece of, and solder this wire straight to it. We want to press that down right on the board. Let that dry. Now you want to be careful that you don't touch any other wires. This has got a lot of space here, but in some areas, like right here, you want to solder to there, not to there and there, so be careful with that. Then we're going to take this other end and put it to the point that we wanted to go to over here. Add a little solder. Okay, let that dry. Now we can kind of trim up a little excess if we have any that we don't need. Like I said, that'll keep from touching somewhere else. Now, when we check that with our continuity meter, we should have continuity all the way from point A to point B. Now, here's what I recommend. A lot of guys say super glue or whatever. I like to use a hot glue gun and to just touch this up and leave a little hot glue so that this is not dangling from your board like this. It actually does stay. You'll notice I actually cut this a little long. I'd rather have a little bit extra in case later on you have to come in here and do another repair or this gets torn or something. This may be a little long, but it gave you guys, was able to show you guys what to do better. You could actually cut this a little shorter. All you got to do is make sure it goes from here to here. But a little hot glue you can dab here, here, there, and that'll keep the wire close to the board and make your job look a little bit more professional. One thing that we should definitely mention at this time, you might notice I'm working on a wooden bench with a concrete floor, but especially now that this is winter time here, be very careful of static, especially if you have carpet around your floors or any area that's going to make static. You see some places, Jonathan can include this in the notes, but like a ground strap that you wear, those are great ideas and good things to do. And sometimes in a more controlled setting, or like when I'm at work, I would use those too. But out here in my shop, it's not as bad. There's not any static around me today, or very little that I can tell. Next thing we're going to talk about is the chips. Remember about removing these chips. Now, they do make a chip puller, and it seems like every time I get one, I break them after just a few times. I must be pretty rough on them. I've had a lot of luck, and most guys that do this, it's just about as easy to take that small screwdriver that we talked about, and what you want to do is get right up in between where the chip meets the socket, right in there. And you're going to lift up on that end, and then go around to the other end. Sometimes there's other chips and stuff in your way. You just got to learn to work around those things. Be careful. Don't do this too fast. You can damage the legs of your chip. So you don't want to just get in here and just yank right off the bat. I loosen up one end at a time. Taking your time during this step will save you so much time later. So little at a time till you get to the point where you can pull the chip up. Now you can inspect to make sure. Here's one thing to check. If any one of these legs is missing or broke or anything, your whole game may not work because of that one pin right there. So a lot of times that's how you can tell if a chip is bad. Also, you might notice, we've talked about this before, there's a notch on this chip. That tells the direction that you need to put it in. There's also a notch here on this board down at the bottom right there. A lot of times it kind of makes sense. You can tell how the other chips are going, but don't always trust that. Trust there, or trust the etching right here on the board. You can see there's a notch right there. It's showing you that this chip should be facing that direction. So again, we've checked. We can clean these pins. You know, you can kind of etch some of the oxidation off of them, or take a, you know, you can take a, lost my brush, something like a light bristle brush like this. I do recommend that you use a wire brush, but just be careful. You don't want to get too tough with it. But this will clean those legs really good, and you can probably even see this in the video, how much shinier they're getting just from cleaning them right like that. That'll make sure that those make a really good connection. Anyway, cleaning those chips, then putting it back in. A lot of times the legs will kind of flare out when you pull the chip up. They kind of do like this. You got to make sure that you're pushing them, that they're all in a row, and that they actually will go in to each hole. Again, making sure the notch and everything is the right way. If you don't put this chip back in just right, you won't, if any one leg is not lined up, remember that could cause your game or something not to work. A lot of times I go to work on a board and I'll notice one of these legs will be sticking outside, kind of hanging over the edge. Well, that's not making continuity down here on the bottom so that it can go on and the trace can allow the electricity to flow through it, or the data, however you want to look at that. Anyway, so we got that chip good and cleaned. We're going to replace this capacitor. We've cleaned this. That should do it for this board. Now, like I said, it could go into some other deeper problems. We're not going to discuss those today, but these are a few things I would check before I sent my board off for repair. Again, these are just some very basic things that you can do. We may get into some more advanced videos later, but for especially some of you new guys, you need to inspect your boards, look for broken traces, look for parts that could be bad, burnt, swollen. A lot of times you can see a lot of these things with your eyes, and that'll give you an idea where to start. Also look for socketed chips that could have broken legs or corroded or look bad, be bad. You can try to replace those. Sometimes they're real easy to pop in and we'll put a new one in. Anyway, we hope that you've enjoyed this video. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please email, call, or write us. You guys know how to get in touch with us by now. And we want to thanks again for watching the Arcade Repair Tips video series, now in high def.